When the canvas was young and the first worlds were drawn, Esquie and Monoco watched from the margins, sometimes as guardians, sometimes as companions, always as the quiet foundation beneath someone else's legend. They stood beside the real Verso, endured the rise and fall of painted generations, and outlasted almost everyone, even when their own stories faded into the background. When the world changed, when the cycle of loss and memory spun again, it was Esquie and Monoco who remained, searching, waiting, and refusing to let go of hope, even when the canvas itself threatened to forget them. My name is Vigil, and this is Video Game Lore. What you're about to hear is not a tale the game spells out for you directly. Instead, it's assembled, drawn from main story dialogue, from the details buried in environmental storytelling, and from the background moments that patient players know to look for. When the lore is silent, I've filled those gaps with careful, grounded interpretation. This is the story of Esquie and Monoco, two of the most enduring, quietly essential souls in the world of Clair Obscur, Expedition 33. Let's begin. Before the canvas was ever painted into being, Esquie existed as nothing more than a plush toy, a silent confidant for Verso during the long, solitary hours spent in his mother's studio. In those early years, Esquie was an anchor, something Verso could cling to as he watched his mother work and struggled to master the skills of painting and chroma under the relentless expectations of his family. The toy likely became his surrogate audience for stories he was too shy to share aloud, or a shield against the pressure to become a painter when his heart was drawn to music. In moments of doubt or anxiety, Verso held Esquie close, drawing comfort from something that could neither judge nor demand. When the time came for Verso to forge his new world inside the canvas, his first instinct was to transform this childhood relic from a passive object into an active guide. He painted Esquie again and again, hundreds of attempts, each one a step closer to the companion he needed. The remnants of those sketches still drift through the oldest layers of the canvas, now known as Verso's drafts. By granting Esquie life, Verso was not merely animating a toy, he was externalizing a lifelong need for protection, creating a guardian who could walk beside him through the surreal landscapes of his imagination, never judging, never failing. Esquie became more than a pet. He was an active protector, a bridge between the loneliness of Verso's real life and the boundless possibility of the canvas. With Esquie at his side, Verso could venture deeper into his own creations, secure in the knowledge that he would never have to face the unknown alone. In those early days, Esquie accompanied Verso on countless adventures. Alongside the half-baked Gestrals, they sparred to test their skills, with Verso allowing them to unleash their full abilities, full brush mode, just to hold their own. But Esquie was simply too strong, quickly earning a reputation as the most powerful being in the canvas. Their days were filled with swimming competitions, as Verso loved the water, yet no matter how much he practiced or how many times he challenged Esquie, he could never win. Clair would join in as well, along with Francois, who would become Esquie's best friend. Together they sang, danced, and fought, giving life to a world where even the act of battle was a form of play. When Verso faced obstacles or problems, Esquie's role was clear. He would pick Verso up, carry him on his back, and fix whatever needed fixing. Sometimes with strength, sometimes with words, and sometimes with philosophy, talking through the issue until it no longer seemed insurmountable. Inspired by his love for the wrestlers at the carnival, Verso instilled in Esquie and the half-baked Gestrals a passion for combat. He filled the canvas with creatures designed to challenge them, each battle an opportunity to grow stronger and closer. Yet for all the time Verso spent in his painted world, reality would always call him back, forcing him to leave Esquie behind. In those absences, Esquie wandered the canvas on his own, embarking on solitary adventures that stretched for decades or even centuries, as time in the canvas moved at a different pace than in the real world. One day, Verso returned to the canvas more burdened than before, weighed down by his parents' demands and the suffocating insistence that he would never become a real musician. Rather than letting that pain root itself in his soul, he gave it form, creating Osceo, the most villainous being the canvas had ever seen. Oscio was the physical embodiment of Verso's pain, insecurities, and anger, modeled after Verso's favorite villain wrestler from the Fête Foraine, also known as a carnival. His appearance and demeanor reflected both theatricality and real darkness. Esquie stood by Verso's side as they faced Oscio together, battling the living shadow of Verso's doubt. Time and again, they would defeat him, and after each victory, Esquie would talk things through with Verso, helping him process and release the pain. For years, this pattern continued: adventure, struggle, reflection, until inevitably, something changed. In time, Verso and Clair resolved to elevate the canvas to a new level, setting aside the playful whimsy of Verso's original world and starting again from scratch. Together, they painted a fresh layer atop the old, a foundation for something vaster and more ambitious. Esquie watched over them during this process, serving as both guardian and companion, as Clair and Verso poured their energy into creation. They shaped an expansive landscape, filling it with forests, mountains, and vistas waiting to be explored. As the world took form, Verso began to breathe life into the beings he had first imagined in his earliest drafts, granting them real presence in this new domain. These creations would become known as the Gestrals and the Grandis, sentient, mysterious, and capable of evolving with the canvas itself. Throughout their many adventures, Esquie's role only grew. It was during these explorations that he discovered a rock unlike any other, one that spoke to him and revealed its name: Sori. Sori offered Esquie the ability to fly with enough strength to carry others across the sky, even into the reaches of space itself. Esquie absorbed Sori's power, and he and Verso soared together through the canvas, their journeys reaching new heights. But Sori was only the beginning. Esquie would go on to find other stones, each granting him unique abilities. Flori gave him the strength to swim while bearing great weight. Dori allowed him to shatter through hard structures like coral. Uri enabled him to dive and swim deep beneath the water's surface. Each new stone made Esquie even more formidable, his capabilities growing with every discovery. Yet, for all his strength, Esquie's playful nature remained. He would sometimes laugh so hard that he would spit out his precious stones, taking Verso on even more quests to recover them. Meanwhile, in the real world, Verso's childhood was marked by the presence of a beloved family dog named Monoco. When Monoco passed, the family brought home another and named him Monoco II. Verso's love for these dogs and the loyalty they embodied became a longing he carried into the canvas. To capture that spirit, he created Monoco, the white-haired Gestral, infusing him with the same devotion and heart. Drawing inspiration from the tradition of renaming each new family dog, Verso granted the Gestrals a form of semi-reincarnation at the Gestral Sacred River. When a Gestral died, they would return changed, with fewer memories of their former life, mirroring the bitter-sweet cycle of loss and renewal that came with each new Monoco in the real world. Monoco, however, was the exception to the rule. Unlike the other Gestrals, his bond with Verso allowed him to reincarnate after death, and over time, gradually reclaim the memories he had lost. This unique connection set him apart, ensuring that no matter how many cycles passed, Monoco's loyalty and sense of self would ultimately endure, echoing the enduring presence of the family dog that had inspired his creation. Monoco was created with an inherent sense of love and loyalty, a living manifestation of the bond Verso had cherished with his dogs. Esquie greeted Monoco with boundless enthusiasm, and together, Esquie, Monoco, and Verso continued to find trouble and adventure throughout the canvas. Their escapades were more than mere distraction. They were Verso's way of escaping the mounting pressure and expectations of his real life, allowing him to find joy, camaraderie, and respite in the world he had made. As Verso matured, the canvas continued to evolve in its absence. A millennia slipped by within its painted boundaries, the world growing and changing even as Verso's presence became less frequent. Yet, no matter how much time passed, Monoco and Esquie were always there to greet him, their loyalty unwavering, their excitement undimmed each time he returned from the real world. Eventually, the cycle repeated itself in reality. Verso's family dog Monoco II died, and they welcomed a new dog named Noco. Mirroring this change, Verso created Noco within the canvas as well. Unlike Monoco, Noco was a more traditional Gestral. Each time he died and returned at the Sacred River, he lost a little more of himself, his memories fading with each rebirth. Monoco became Noco's guardian, taking on the role of mentor and caretaker, guiding him through the rituals of fighting and teaching him the art of becoming a great merchant. Their adventures continued, and the bond between them deepened. Whenever one of them was lost and reborn, the survivor would assume the responsibility of raising the other anew, ensuring the cycle continued unbroken. Verso, meanwhile, continued his passage back and forth between the real world and the canvas, struggling to meet the expectations of his parents and the demands of becoming a painter. With each absence, centuries would slip by on the canvas, the world shifting and growing in ways Verso could barely comprehend. Monoco and Esquie, left to their own devices, embarked on countless adventures of their own, though more often than not, Esquie could be found reclining in his cave, luxuriating in his hot spring, and bickering with Francois. It is here that I want to pause and examine some of the most intriguing questions the game leaves us, the mysteries of time dilation between the real world and the canvas, and how the passage of time transforms not only the world itself, but every being within it. To truly grasp the depth of the canvas and the lives shaped within it, we have to confront the question of time. The passage of years in the real world is not mirrored in the painted one. It is distorted, stretched, accelerated, and at times almost unfathomable. Let's start with Verso's youth. He most likely created the half-baked Gestrals when he was around 7 or 8 years old. He died at 26. In the real world, that means roughly 18 to 19 years passed between the moment he brought those half-baked Gestrals into being and his death. But inside the canvas, time was already racing far ahead. Our clearest anchor comes from Oscio, who tells Esquie he held his breath for 5,000 years. This period began when Verso was between 10 and 12, creating the new world above the old layer with Clair. Taking age 11 as a midpoint, from 11 to 26 is 15 real years. In those 15 years, at least 5,000 years passed for Oscio and the half-baked Gestrals. That gives us a staggering time dilation ratio. 5,000 years divided by 15 real years, roughly 333 canvas years for every single year in reality. Apply that same ratio to the full period, from Verso's first creation of the half-baked Gestrals at age 7 or 8, to his death at 26, and you arrive at a span of approximately 6,000 to 6,300 canvas years. The beings Verso gave life to as a child experienced thousands of years, while only a fraction of a lifetime passed for him in the real world. For the half-baked Gestrals, it is no exaggeration. They had not seen humans or Verso for many millennia. For them, it really had been ages. Now consider what happened after Verso's death. About 3 real-world months later, after Eileen had spent time caring for Alicia in the aftermath of the fire and beginning to drift into depression, Eileen entered the canvas and created the first humans, along with the city of Lumiere. In reality, it takes severe burns about 7 to 8 months to heal and scar in the early 1900s without antibiotics. By the time Alicia enters the canvas, her burns have scarred over. Eileen returned again and again to the canvas, each day lasting a few days, never longer than the human body could survive without water. During these visits, time in the canvas moved at an astonishing rate during those 6 months. The strongest anchor for post-fracture time dilation comes from Eileen and Renoir's own experience. After the fracture, they spent 67 years together inside the canvas, trapped at the monolith. When Eileen finally returned to the real world, only 3 days had passed. Her body could not have survived any longer without water. This gives us a new and even more dramatic ratio: 67 canvas years for every 3 real days, or about 22.33 canvas years for each single day in reality. 1 month equals around 670 canvas years, a single year, over 8,150 canvas years. Apply this to Eileen's 6 months of visits. 6 months is about 182 real days. At this rate, over 4,000 canvas years passed during her period of coming and going. From the moment humanity was created in the canvas until the end of Eileen's visits, the painted world lived through multiple full millennia, thousands of years of history, culture, and development, while only half a year passed for Eileen herself. Put the whole timeline together, from Verso's creation of the half-baked Gestrals at age 7 or 8 to his death at 26, 154,850 canvas years elapsed. 3 months after his death, Eileen created humans in the canvas. After the following 6 months, another 4,000 canvas years went by. By the time the half-baked Gestrals finally encountered painted Verso, just 9 months after the real Verso's death, 158,850 years had passed in the canvas since those first childhood creations. This extreme time dilation explains everything. It's why the Gestrals speak of millennia without seeing humans or Verso. It's why Oscio claims to have held his breath for 5,000 years. It's why the canvas feels ancient and tragic. and why Eileen returns to the real world visibly sick and weakened after what seemed to outsiders like only a short absence. Time in the canvas is not simply accelerated, it is collapsed, folded in on itself, so that centuries and whole civilizations can rise and fall in the span of a single human lifetime. That is the haunting and beautiful truth at the heart of Expedition 33. In the painted world, the weight of time is both a blessing and a curse, and every moment echoes with the memory of ages. Returning to the story of Monoco and Esquie, in the real world, the Desandra family would eventually welcome another small dog, naming it Monoco III. While this had little direct effect on the painted world, it is a detail worth noting. By the time Alicia enters the canvas, 2 dogs can be seen in the family's life, a subtle echo of the cycles that shape the Gestrals' own existence. Across thousands of years in the canvas, compressed into mere decades in reality, Monoco and Esquie's adventures with Verso continued. But everything changed on December 3rd, 1905, the day Verso died in the fire that consumed the Desandra Manor. The lore does not specify how much Esquie or Monoco understood in that moment, but given their deep connection to Verso's soul within the canvas, it is likely that both felt a profound disconnection, an unspoken shift in the world's essence. They would have known, on some primordial level, that something was deeply wrong. Then, Eileen, Verso's mother, entered the canvas. She painted a new city, Lumiere, and created the first humans within the painted world. As these new humans began to live and thrive, they came to know of the Gestrals and of Esquie himself. While the lore is silent on the specifics of Esquie's interactions with these early humans, it is likely that he had on occasion enigmatic encounters, leaving behind stories and legends that would shape human understanding of Esquie for generations after the fracture. Eventually, Renoir entered the canvas as well, and by this time, Eileen had created her painted versions of her family and been living with them in the canvas longer than she should have. His conflict with Eileen shattered the painted world, casting Lumiere out to sea and tearing it away from the remnants of the old city. This cataclysm scattered not only the humans, but the Gestrals as well, many of whom were killed in the chaos, including Monoco. In the aftermath, a fully grown Noco found a reincarnated Monoco wandering alone, and then raising him in turn as he had once done for him. During this time, Golgra made both Noco and Monoco into Gestral seekers, tasking them with finding and reuniting the lost Gestrals who had been scattered after the fracture. Monoco spent the following years searching for others of his kind, encountering many Nevrons created by the real-world Clair. In one of these encounters, it is likely that Noco was killed by a Nevron, prompting Monoco to beg Golgra to bring Noco back, the one soul who had saved him and made him into a great seeker in the first place. Golgra refused, telling Monoco that he would have to wait like all the other Gestrals before him, each in their turn. Unwilling to accept this, Monoco went to the sacred river without Golgra's permission, in a desperate attempt to bring Noco back. This act made him an outcast, yet he continued his work as a seeker, searching for lost Gestrals across the painted world. The lore does not state Esquie's reaction, but it is likely that despite his nature as a being of joy and lightness, he felt the weight of these losses. Still, Esquie likely continued his days with Francois, finding solace in friendships and the familiar rhythms of his cave. Eventually, Monoco and Esquie would cross paths with painted Verso, who by then had been exiled from the now island city of Lumiere. Their reunion was marked by a sense of recognition, a connection to the real Verso's soul, which persisted in the heart of the canvas. For a moment, it was almost as if nothing had changed. Esquie offered comfort to painted Verso, helping him come to terms with the truth of his own existence as a painted copy of their lost friend. Monoco, never one to shy from confrontation, likely challenged him to a duel, hoping to drive away the sorrow with action. The three resumed their adventures, though with new shadows hanging over them. Painted Verso's focus shifted to a singular purpose, ridding the canvas of his mother, the Paintress, to save her life and end his own existence as a painted echo. He made Esquie promise never to reveal his true identity, and often enlisted Monoco's help in joining expeditions to defeat the Paintress. There came a time when Monoco and painted Verso retreated deep into the frozen hearts, deep in the Grandis mountains, their days spent together in the heart of the old train station at its peak, living and fighting side by side. Their time there was marked by hardship and resilience. On one occasion, painted Verso was torn in half by a Pelerin, and it fell to Monoco to come to his aid, piecing them back together so they could continue. In another, Monoco found himself crushed beneath the massive weight of a Stellact, and it was painted Verso who carried him to safety, pulling him out of danger. Eventually, they descended from the mountains and resumed their quest to find the lost Gestrals, making their way through the rock quarry. a place littered with the remains of thousands of fallen expeditioners and Nevrons. The devastation there was a stark reminder of the cost of every expedition, every failure etched into the landscape itself. Their journey through the quarry brought them face to face with the duelist. Like so many before them, they were utterly defeated, unable to overcome its power. After the battle, the two took a break and rejoined Esquie. Monoco, driven by his relentless need to test himself, challenged Esquie to a duel. Painted Verso, perhaps out of oversight or mischief, failed to warn Monoco of Esquie's true strength, far beyond that of any other being in their world. The result was inevitable. The battle did not end well for Monoco. During Monolith Year 66, Esquie was approached by the members of Expedition 66. The group, likely weary and desperate for aid, managed to find their way to his cave. Esquie, ever good-natured and eager to help, did what he could, offering them food in the form of mushrooms he had gathered. In his innocence, he neglected to consider the difference between his immortal friend Painted Verso, who could eat them without consequence, and the mortality of humans. Only after it was too late did Esquie remember to mention this crucial fact, realizing that what was nourishment for an immortal could prove poisonous for those still bound by the limits of human life. After decades of witnessing expedition after expedition fall to ruin on this quest, and Monoco reviving Noco again without permission, Monoco's hope began to wane. Around Monolith Year 43, he could no longer bear the endless cycle of death and chose to leave Verso and Esquie, unable to watch the suffering any longer. Yet Monoco's sense of loyalty and love for both the real Verso and his painted incarnation never left him. He found himself drawn to the shattered train station, which would later bear his name, Monoco Station. Verso's childhood love of trains was echoed in Monoco's presence there. It became both a sanctuary and a place to protect one of Painted Verso's oldest creations, the Grandis, and a way to hold on to the memory of both Versos, real and painted. Painted Verso's presence in the canvas became increasingly intermittent, his schemes and plans to confront the Paintress drawing him away for long stretches. Though he continued to assist other expeditioners on their journeys, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes simply bearing witness, his attempts almost always ended in failure. Through it all, Esquie remained a constant. No matter how often Painted Verso disappeared into his own designs or retreated from the world, Esquie was always there, ready for a visit, a conversation, or simply to offer the kind of embrace only Esquie could give. At some point, Painted Verso decided to safeguard all the vintage wine he had accumulated over the decades, entrusting it to Esquie for safekeeping. The gesture was more than practical. It was a testament to the enduring trust and friendship between creator and creation. Then, around Monolith Year 39, Esquie's purpose was called upon in a way that echoed his very reason for being. He heard distant cries, tears and anguish carried across the water. Responding as Verso intended him to, Esquie moved without hesitation, setting out to find and comfort those facing their darkest moments. He found a young woman sinking beneath the waves, her despair threatening to claim her. Esquie plunged into the ocean, rescuing her and bringing her safely back to the docks of Lumiere. In that moment, Esquie fulfilled the role Verso had created for him, to be a guardian in the face of sorrow, a lifeline for those in need. In the years that followed, Painted Verso maintained his routines with Esquie, but by Monolith Year 36, he vanished and never returned. The lore offers no explanation for his absence, but it is likely he was consumed by his ultimate goal, removing his mother, the Paintress, from the canvas once and for all. For Esquie, it would be another 3 years, 67 hours, and 10 minutes before he would see Painted Verso again. For Monoco, the wait would be even longer. Then, Monolith Year 33 arrived. Esquie, as was his custom, spent his days flying across the canvas, reveling in the freedom and beauty of the world. Upon returning home, he was greeted by an unexpected surprise, a group of visitors waiting for him in the caves where he resided, the hot spring still steaming from his absence. Esquie rose from the water and greeted the newcomers with his charismatic warmth. Among them was a young woman named Ciel. In that instant, a memory flickered in Esquie's mind. He recognized her as the woman he had once saved from drowning, and he called her his terrible swimmer friend, asking if she wanted to learn to swim. Ciel, however, was confused, uncertain what he meant. Gustave, another member of the group, explained that Golgra had sent them, saying Esquie could help them cross the sea to reach the Paintress. Esquie, true to form, responded in a riddle, "A rolling stone gathers no moss." Ciel remarked to the others that it was rumored Esquie liked to speak in riddles. Esquie, with a laugh, replied, "In what way?" Lune, anxious to move forward, pressed Esquie for help. explaining they needed to reach the Paintress. Esquie told them there were too many to carry across the sea on his back, and that to do so, he needed Flory, his magical rock that granted him the necessary strength. Unfortunately, his arch-nemesis Francois had stolen Flory and would need to be confronted. Gustave asked if Francois was in Nevron territory, but Esquie clarified that Francois lived in the cave right next to his own. Gustave resolved to retrieve the stone, and Esquie wished them luck, his excitement barely contained, urging them to bring back Flory. As the others departed, Ciel lingered, asking Esquie how he knew her. He answered with a cryptic phrase, "Men trip not on mountains, but stumble on stones." Moments later, the sound of Francois shouting reached Esquie's ears, accusing him of sending over hooligans. Esquie called back, telling Francois to stop being mean, assuring him that the newcomers were nice. Esquie observed as the expeditioners confronted and fought Francois. When Francois was defeated, Esquie laughed, congratulating them on their victory. Soon, the group returned and handed him the recovered rock. At first, Esquie was elated, but upon inspection, he realized it was not Flory after all. Francois, ever the trickster, laughed and admitted that he had fooled Esquie, revealing that Flory had been left at the Stonewave Cliffs. Esquie accepted the ruse with good humor, acknowledging that Francois had bested him. Gustave asked if Esquie would still help, and Esquie promised that if they helped him recover Flory, they would be best friends. Lune pointed out that they had just seen Esquie fly a few minutes earlier. Esquie replied that the group was too heavy for him to carry now, explaining he had lost all his special rocks. If they helped him retrieve them, he could fly them just as he once flown his best friend Verso. Lune agreed to help, and Gustave asked for directions to the Stonewave Cliffs. Esquie instructed them to keep heading toward the number 33 on the monolith. They could not miss it. With a cheer, Esquie took flight, promising to meet them outside. He later joined them as they exited the cave, and together they made camp for the evening, preparing for the journey ahead. That night at camp, Gustave approached Esquie seeking conversation. Esquie admitted that it had been a long time since he had seen humans, noting with innocent candor that they appeared skinnier than he remembered. Gustave asked when Esquie had last encountered humans, to which Esquie replied that it had not been since his best friend had asked him for help. Gustave, puzzled, pressed further, asking if his best friend was human. He had assumed Francois held that title. Esquie, in his characteristically confusing way, simply responded with, "Yes," leaving Gustave even more uncertain as he departed for the night. As the others slept, Esquie watched over them, remaining vigilant until dawn. With the rising sun, the expeditioners set out for the Stonewave Cliffs. Upon arrival, Esquie soared overhead, excitement in his voice as he announced he could sense Flory nearby. Maël asked why, if he could fly, Esquie didn't simply retrieve Flory himself. Esquie replied it was too much effort, his tone light but resolute. Suddenly, a giant Nevron emerged from the sea. Esquie flew up to confront it, gathering chroma until he doubled in size. With a triumphant cheer, he smashed into the Nevron, defeating it with ease before continuing his search around the cliffs, ever watchful for signs of Flory. As the sun began to set, Esquie rejoined the expeditioners, now on the northeast side of the cliffs. With a joyful shout, he told them he could sense Flory close at hand, but paused, noting that he could sense something frightening nearby. After the expeditioners succeeded in knocking the Lampmaster into the waves, Esquie swooped down as Ciel held Flory aloft. Esquie called out Flory's name before absorbing the stone, visibly empowered. He declared that they were ready to set sail, plunging into the water and inviting them to join him. While waiting, Esquie heard someone shout the word wine and echoed the word back, as if recognizing that someone knew he had been entrusted with Verso's wine. At last, Ciel and Lune leapt down onto Esquie's stomach. As they discussed their next steps and peppered Esquie with further questions, they awaited Maël and Gustave. Suddenly, a commotion from above caught their attention. Lune demanded Esquie fly them up, but he remembered he needed a different stone to be able to carry them through the air. Before they could act, the Lampmaster burst from the water, launching itself at Lune and Ciel. The two women engaged the Nevron in a desperate battle, while Esquie did his best to keep them afloat. In time, they brought the creature down, exhaustion mingling with relief. Maël soon joined them, having jumped down from above. When asked after Gustave, she delivered the devastating news. He was dead, and nothing more could be done. Sensing their grief, Esquie carried the survivors to the nearest shore, where they made camp for the night, united in loss and uncertainty, but determined to continue. Back at camp, Maël's pain and anger spilled forth, unable to be contained. Esquie, ever attuned to the emotions of those around him, sensed the turmoil welling up inside her. He stood over Maëlle as she looked up, her grief and frustration written plainly across her face. Without a word, Esquie outstretched his arms. Maëlle moved closer, overcome by the weight she carried, and began to vent her frustration by punching him in the stomach. Esquie, unfazed, wrapped his arms around her, holding her in a warm, comforting embrace. Eventually, her defenses fell, and she relented, returning his hug and finding solace in his presence. As the night deepened, Esquie sat at the edge of the cliffside, meditating beneath the stars. Maëlle, seeking comfort, lay down beside him and drifted to sleep, her head resting against his belly. For a time, all was still. Later, Maëlle awoke to see a stranger talking with Ciel and Lune. Curious, she approached. At the same time, Esquie recognized the man and felt a surge of excitement, waiting patiently for his chance to greet his old friend. The man introduced himself to the others, eventually revealing his name, Verso. Esquie waited quietly for the conversation to end. Finally, Painted Verso approached Esquie. With a familiar grin, Esquie remarked that Verso had put on some weight. Painted Verso retorted in kind, calling Esquie a marshmallow and teasing that he had probably lost his stones again. Esquie laughed, acknowledging the jest and affirming that Painted Verso truly knew him, and now that he was back, they could retrieve the stones together. Painted Verso agreed to help, then asked if Esquie had told the others who he truly was, and about his mission to free his mother, the Paintress, from the canvas. Esquie assured him that Maman was the word, just as he promised. Verso told Esquie he was counting on him, and Esquie replied that Verso could always count on him. Painted Verso remarked that it felt like years since they had last seen each other, prompting Esquie to reply with the exact date. Painted Verso laughed, confirming that it had been 3 years, 67 days, 10 hours, and 7 minutes. Esquie pleased to find that he had been keeping track as well. Verso inquired if Francois had his own cave now. Esquie replied that Francois would miss him, as he hated to nap alone. Painted Verso observed that since Esquie was here, Francois was technically alone at the moment. Esquie agreed, saying Francois must be missing him even more. Painted Verso insisted that Francois would survive, and Esquie concurred. Painted Verso then asked how the others managed to convince Esquie to leave his home. Esquie explained that the super nice one was dead now, but that all the newcomers were nice and really cool. He told Painted Verso that he could make some new human friends, since he had not had any for a long time. Painted Verso replied that Esquie should know how he felt about befriending expeditioners. Esquie responded with one of his characteristic sayings, "Losing a rock is better than never having a rock," and told Verso to ask him how he knew. Painted Verso countered that it was debatable, and Esquie remarked that he hoped the new friends would not die like the others. Changing the subject, Painted Verso asked how Esquie had lost his rocks again. Esquie explained that he lost them after they left the Gestral River. Verso promised to help him get them back, and Esquie confided that he missed going on adventures with him. Painted Verso agreed he missed it too, before taking his leave. Esquie settled in for a night of meditation, preparing for the journey ahead. The next day, Esquie delivered the expeditioners to the entrance of the rock quarry, a place now known as the Forgotten Battlefield. He took flight, promising to meet them at the northern exit. When the group emerged on the far side, Esquie watched in silence as they gathered to make a grave for Gustave, each offering their condolences and a moment of quiet reflection. Esquie felt the weight of their sadness, standing apart but sharing in their grief, until the campfire drew them away for the night. As the camp settled, Painted Verso approached Esquie. Esquie remarked on the sadness he had witnessed at the grave, noting that he had seen the same sorrow in Painted Verso's eyes. Painted Verso agreed, admitting he felt it too. Esquie asked if he was thinking of Julie, and Painted Verso said that he was, but also of all the others he had lost throughout the decades. Esquie, ever the comforter, offered him a hug, and Painted Verso accepted. After their embrace, Esquie mused aloud that Maëlle reminded him of someone. Painted Verso, wary of what Esquie might deduce, asked if he meant Maëlle. Esquie wondered if he had met her before. Not wanting Esquie to connect the dots, Painted Verso deflected, said that Esquie thought he had once met Ciel before as well. Esquie insisted, claiming he knew Ciel, but then doubted himself, questioning whether he truly did. Painted Verso reminded Esquie of his habit of saying all humans look the same, to which Esquie replied that all humans are cousins. Same, but different. Painted Verso considered this, saying maybe that's what it was about Maëlle. Suddenly, Esquie grew excited as an epiphany struck him. To him, it was like how Painted Verso was Verso's cousin, and Maëlle was Maëlle's cousin too, and he praised Painted Verso's wisdom. Painted Verso played along, saying that almost made sense, and Esquie assured him he was still smart, even if he didn't understand it all. Painted Verso told him he was a ball of nonsense sometimes, to which Esquie replied that's why they were best friends. They talked a little longer, the comfort of old friendship softening the sadness of the day, before Painted Verso wandered off to speak with the others. The next day, the expeditioners arrived at Monoco Station. Esquie dropped them off at the entrance before taking flight once again to await them from above. Inside the station, Monoco caught sight of Esquie circling overhead and immediately began preparing for an encounter with his old friend. As Painted Verso led the others onto the platform, Monoco launched himself from above in a surprise attack. Painted Verso, quick to react, called him slow as he blocked the assault, while Monoco retorted that his reflex remained as sharp as ever. Esquie called out to Monoco in excitement, and Monoco asked if it was Painted Verso who had dragged him into this new adventure. He inquired if Painted Verso had made new friends, prompting Lune to wonder aloud how Monoco was able to speak their language. Painted Verso explained that he had taught Monoco over the many decades they had spent together. Intent on showing off, Monoco challenged the women to a duel, his bravado unmistakably gestural. The group laughed at his antics, but Painted Verso urged them to indulge Monoco, knowing it would help him calm down. The expeditioners accepted the challenge, and Monoco demonstrated his unique, somewhat awkward fighting style. Despite his efforts, they gained the upper hand and defeated him. As the duel concluded, Noko shouted a warning about Nevrons. Monoco, undeterred, called Noko's son and told him to distract him while he was busy beating up strangers. Painted Verso redirected Noko's attention, asking about the Nevron, and Noko explained that a stalact was on its way and the Grandis had retreated into hiding. With the threat looming, the group prepared to face the stalact. Monoco hesitated, trying to hide that stalacts were the only Nevron he truly feared. Looking for a way out, he declared that as guests, the expeditioners deserved the honor of fighting the creature. The group laughed at Monoco's maneuver, but Painted Verso assured them he was quite serious. As the expeditioners moved in to battle the stalact, Painted Verso looked back, calling Monoco a coward. Monoco simply shooed him away and took a seat to observe. After the expeditioners managed to defeat the Nevron, Monoco praised them, declaring that they had proven themselves worthy friends, and Painted Verso teased him about being jealous. He then began tearing at the fallen stalact, digging and pulling until he finally wrenched free its foot. With a triumphant yell, Monoco briefly transformed into a stalact, revealing his newfound power. As Monoco picked up his weapon, now fitted with a bell given by the Grandis to ward off Nevrons, he asked the group what brought them to the station. Painted Verso responded that they were headed to Old Lumiere, prompting Monoco to bid them a quick farewell. Painted Verso pressed him, reminding Monoco of their past failures, calling him a doofus and asking if he recognized Mael. Monoco acknowledged her, and Painted Verso insisted that this could be their only chance. Monoco replied that it was his only shot, and insisted he would never join Painted Verso again. The exchange turned quick-witted, with Painted Verso predicting a lot of fighting ahead. Monoco agreed, and the two bantered back and forth until Monoco finally relented and agreed to accompany them. When Monoco declared he was coming along as well, Monoco, considering himself a responsible parent, agreed that it sounded like a great idea. With the group assembled, they left the station and made camp for the night, preparing for the next stage of their journey. Back at camp, Esquie began sharing his thoughts on nicknames, saying that Momo was Momo and Nono was Nono. As he continued, Painted Verso, reluctant yet amused, warned that others might not appreciate such names. Esquie asked if Painted Verso wanted to be called Verver. Painted Verso promptly refused, while Esquie blew a raspberry in response. Switching topics, Esquie complimented Painted Verso's expedition armband. Painted Verso replied that they were now officially part of the disaster expedition. Esquie blew another raspberry, prompting Painted Verso to ask if he wanted an armband of his own. Painted Verso laughed, pointing out that Esquie barely had arms. Esquie insisted otherwise, but admitted he would prefer a headband. Painted Verso joked that they would need a great deal of cloth to fit Esquie's large head, to which Esquie replied that he has a big brain. Painted Verso promised to see what he could do, and later returned with a headband for Esquie. Esquie wore it with pride, declaring it the nicest thing ever, thanking Painted Verso and dancing around the campsite. Painted Verso bid him farewell and moved on to find Monoco. Monoco, upon seeing Painted Verso, asked if Golgar was still angry with him. Painted Verso turned the question back to him, applying the answer was obvious. Monoco wondered aloud why Golgar would be upset, especially since she had helped Noko start his shop. Painted Verso reminded Monoco that Noko had not defied Golgar's orders about bringing him back. Monoco insisted Noco would have done the same, but Painted Verso pointed out that Noco would have made Golgra happy first. Monoco grumbled that Golgra should move on and changed the subject, remarking that Painted Verso had grown stronger in his absence. Painted Verso credited his strength to not hiding in the mountains for a decade, while Monoco reminded him about the time he saved him from the Pellerin attack. Painted Verso countered with the memory of saving Monoco from the Stalact, prompting Monoco to propose a fight. Painted Verso declined, saying he needed sleep, and Monoco called him a coward. Painted Verso retorted that Monoco was weak, and boasted he could beat him blindfolded. Monoco claimed to have found inner peace, immune to Painted Verso's jabs. Painted Verso admitted he missed their adventures, and as Monoco scoffed, he insisted Monoco did too. The two reminisced about past exploits before Painted Verso excused himself to talk with the others. Later, Painted Verso returned as Monoco recounted tales of his own strength, claiming to have smashed a Stalact in 2 attacks and bested a Pellerin without trouble. Painted Verso laughed, calling Pellerins weak, and boasted he could have done it blindfolded. Monoco remarked on the expedition's gloom, and Painted Verso explained that the group had suffered many losses to reach this point, and that grief took time. Monoco suggested they try a little Verso magic to lift the mood, specifically the kind that hurt like hell. Painted Verso resigned, agreed, and Monoco proceeded to rip him in half. Painted Verso's 2 halves made their way over to the group, performing and changing the group's mood. Monoco looked on concerned, realizing how much pain Painted Verso was enduring just to make the others laugh. He wondered if he was becoming too close to this group of humans and painted souls. As the night wore on, they all tried to rest, preparing themselves for the journey to Old Lumiere. The group set out for Old Lumiere, riding on Esquie as he carried them across the landscape. Upon arrival, Esquie dropped them off at the outskirts of the city and took flight once more, circling high above the ruins. Monoco and the others made their way inside, only to be halted by a large, impassable building. Painted Verso explained that they needed to reach the city center to find the Paintress's heart, and then he turned to Monoco, urging him to show off his abilities. Monoco, eager to prove himself, told Painted Verso to admit he couldn't do it alone. He then stepped forward and transformed into a Stalact, rearing back and smashing through the barrier with explosive force. The resulting blast separated the group, scattering them among the debris. Monoco found himself sitting atop the rubble, overcome with guilt and grief, believing he had just killed his new friends. Ciel and Lune slowly regained consciousness nearby, and as they rose to their feet, Lune saw Monoco crying. She demanded to know why he would do something so reckless. Monoco, still distraught, apologized, explaining that he only wanted to show off. Ciel reassured him, insisting they needed to regroup and that things would be alright. Lune added that he needed to stop crying so they could move forward. As they navigated the ruins, Ciel and Lune asked Monoco what life had been like before the fracture. Monoco replied that the world had once been smaller and far livelier, filled with many more Gestrals before the fracture tore apart their villages. Now, he told them, only a fraction of a fraction remained, with forests haunted by Gestrals awaiting rebirth. The group pressed on, eventually reaching the site where the fallen Axon known as the Hauler lay dead. Ciel and Lune searched for clues, while Monoco hung back, silently hoping they would not press him for details about his past. Ciel confided to Lune that she suspected Painted Verso was hiding something. They turned to Monoco, who quickly looked away, feigning ignorance. Lune asked Monoco how he had met Painted Verso, and Monoco claimed not to remember, saying it felt as though he had always known him. They brought up other expeditions they had traveled with, and asked what happened to them. Monoco pretended to ponder the question, but repeated it to himself without offering a real answer. As they continued their search, Lune asked Monoco about the identity of the large woman they had seen. Monoco admitted that he had never been to Old Lumiere before. Lune then discovered the journal of Expedition 58, and upon reading it, was shocked by what she found. She showed it to Monoco, wanting to know if what it said about Painted Verso was true. Monoco refused to answer, and Lune insisted they needed to find Mael quickly. Monoco tried to reassure them, claiming Painted Verso would never harm Mael. The 3 of them hurried off to find Mael and Noco. They finally arrived at a large manor, where they found Painted Verso, Mael, and Noco locked in a heated argument with Painted Renoir. Lune burst onto the scene, interrupting with a bolt of lightning, and immediately beginning to question Painted Verso. Painted Renoir, reaching the limit of his patience, slammed his cane to the ground. Painted Verso warned the others to prepare, emphasizing his desire for everyone to survive. Monoco and the others braced themselves as the battle began. The fight was fierce and hard won, but eventually they wore Painted Renoir down. However, he quickly recovered, slowly raising his K high and gathering a massive amount of chroma. Monoco, witnessing the surge of energy, stumbled back, his thoughts only on protecting Noko. He rushed to shield Noko as the blast struck the expeditioners. When the dust settled and the group regained their senses, they saw Noko lying lifeless in Monoco's arms. The sight horrified everyone. Monoco, heartbroken, cradled Noko and declared that Noko was broken. Maëlle, overcome with anger and grief, attacked Painted Renoir, who tried to strike her down in return. But Painted Verso intervened, blocking the blow. In an instant, the manor and Painted Renoir vanished, leaving Monoco still holding Noko, as Painted Verso, filled with anger, vented his frustration. The group stood in heavy silence for a moment before making their way out of Old Lumiere. They reunited with Esquie and made camp for the night, each weighed down by the losses and revelations of the day. That evening, at camp, Esquie waited with anticipation as Ciel approached, revealing that she had found one of his precious rocks, Dory. She handed it to him, and Esquie gratefully absorbed the stone, thanking her with genuine warmth. Nearby, the rest of the group was embroiled in an argument, confronting Painted Verso about his concealed relationship with Painted Renoir. The air grew heavy with silence until it was broken by Monoco, who arrived holding a Gestral container containing Noko. He moved slowly to the fire and sat down, cradling the container close, the weight of loss evident in his posture. Lune broke the quiet, voicing what everyone was wondering. She had heard that Gestrals could reincarnate, and asked if it was true. Could Noko come back? Monoco explained that it was only partially true. Every time a Gestral was brought back from the sacred river, they lost a part of their memories. In essence, he said, the new Noko would be Noko, but not the same Noko. The one they knew was truly gone. Painted Verso expressed his sympathy, lamenting that their efforts had been for nothing, and now the group was left with no way to reach the monolith. Lune, however, insisted there was another way. She led them to the curator and asked for help breaking the barrier. From the curator's response, they realized they would need the hearts of 2 Axons. Monoco watched as the group debated their next move. Painted Verso argued that if they had to fight the Axons, they should start with the one in the western island first, as it had been weakened by previous expeditions. Ciel, half serious, suggested they fight the one to the east first to test themselves, and Monoco, admiring her spirit, agreed. Later, Painted Verso found Esquie and confessed that he was angry. Painted Verso asked if it was about Noko, and Esquie said it was. He thought what happened was cruel, and he had believed Renoir cared more. Painted Verso tried to remind Esquie that Renoir was not the real one, but stopped short, admitting that he was angry too. Together, they walked to the edge of the cliff, where Esquie sat and gazed up at the stars. Painted Verso asked if he enjoyed stargazing, and Esquie replied that stars were the apples of the sky. Painted Verso remarked that he loved Esquie's way of seeing the world, and Esquie pointed out a constellation that he thought looked like Francois. Painted Verso disagreed, saying it wasn't cranky enough, while Esquie insisted Francois wasn't grumpy, he just missed Clea. Then Esquie says, "Well, I can't do it justice. Just watch the scene."
Confronting used to be all wee, but now he's all ooh. Yeah, centuries go by without your best friends. That's gonna make you go
yeah, but at least you shared some. We?
Yes, we. Back in the day, when there was nothing in the world except the 4 of us flying around on adventures.
How come you're not grumpy like Francois?
I am grumpy.
Oh, are you now?
I too am. But I'm also wee. So the wee balances the.
You might say you're a bit wee-woo, then.
You really get me, Verso.
I'm a bit wee-woo myself. Although I'm a bit more woo than wee these days. Hey, that one looks a little like Monoco.
Oh, and if you squint and sort of scrunch up your face, that one next to it looks like Noko.
After their talk about constellations, Painted Verso went to check on Monoco. He apologized, assuring Monoco they would bring Noko back. Monoco said he knew, but wanted to wait until things were settled with the Paintress. Turning away, Monoco sat at the cliffside and began polishing his collection of Never-on feet. Painted Verso joined him, attempting to lighten the mood by asking if he was really polishing them. Monoco confirmed it, asking if Painted Verso thought they were beautiful. Painted Verso played along, saying he admired the legs of their enemies. Monoco, serious, explained that brandishing the polished Never-on feet in battle gave him an advantage, both intimidating and confusing the enemy. Painted Verso joked that he would hate to see anyone using Monoco's leg in battle, mostly because of the smell. Monoco, undeterred, explained that he would turn into his enemies to create chaos, and then after that, the rest of the battle was easy. Painted Verso teased that it never worked against Stalax, and Monoco insisted that was only because Stalax were too stupid to know that they should be afraid of him. Painted Verso suggested they go hunt some Stalax, but Monoco said he needed to finish polishing first. Painted Verso admitted how much he missed Monoco, and Monoco handed him some Never-on feet so he could help. Together, they polished and sang until the work was done. Eventually, everyone settled for the night, preparing for the battles to come. The following day, Esquie guided the expeditioners to Visage Island. As they pressed toward the heart of the island, they encountered the Mask Keeper, who informed them that Visage had invited them to join him at the end of the path. The group navigated the island's divergent trails, overcoming the masks that embodied joy, sadness, and anger, each victory further weakening the Axon's power. When at last they reached Visage himself, they faced the enormous Axon in battle. Working together, they managed to bring Visage down, but their victory was short-lived. The Mask Keeper returned, revealing himself to be the true Axon. With Ciel's resilience at the forefront, the expeditioners endured a final trial, ultimately defeating the Axon and taking his mask back to the Curator. With their objective met, they made camp for the night. At camp, the Curator took the mask from Mael, and as night fell, the group gradually dispersed to their own corners of the campsite. Painted Verso found Esquie and asked why he seemed so grumpy. Esquie lamented that the mask could fly, and so should he. Painted Verso teased him for losing his rocks and wondered aloud how Esquie could lose them if he swallowed them. Esquie explained that when he laughed very hard, sometimes the stones just fell out. Painted Verso crossed over to Monoco, who remarked that Painted Verso had been right about the expeditioners and called them impressive. Painted Verso pressed him, asking if the group had grown on him. Monoco conceded that perhaps they had. Changing the subject, Painted Verso proposed giving Monoco a haircut, calling his current look a wild mop. Monoco retorted that Painted Verso should take a look in the mirror. Painted Verso insisted his hair was perfect and urged Monoco to stop being grumpy and let him try. Monoco agreed on the condition that Painted Verso went first. Painted Verso styled his own hair, prompting Monoco to admit it looked nice and that he would allow Painted Verso to style his as well. Painted Verso obliged, and Monoco, upon seeing the result, declared it very fetching. Painted Verso joked that they were twins now, and the two continued their playful argument over who looked better before parting ways for the night. Later, Mael sought comfort with Esquie, the two sitting beneath the stars. Painted Verso approached and asked if he could play there. Mael shook her head, signaling she did not mind. Painted Verso summoned his piano and began to play, Mael joining in with a gentle hum. The music moved Esquie, reminding him of the joy he once felt when the real Verso played. He danced, his movements graceful and reminiscent of ballet, letting the music carry him. When the song ended, Mael asked for another. Painted Verso agreed, asking if Esquie was ready, and began to play once more as Esquie continued his dance. The night was filled with music and movement, a brief respite from the hardships they had endured. Eventually, the group settled down, each finding rest in the quiet that followed. The next day, Esquie once again became their guide, swimming the group to the eastern island where the next Axon awaited. Lune and Ciel marveled at the surreal architecture as they traversed the structure, eventually coming to the edge of a vast central opening. Below, Seren danced and swayed, her movements mesmerizing as she began to draw the expeditioners under her spell. Monoco explained that she was known as She Who Plays with Wonder, and with a strike of his bell, he snapped the group out of their trance, warning them that Seren played not only with wonder, but with the mind as well. Regaining their senses, the group pressed forward through the structure, making their way to the very center. There, they approached Seren, taking in her immense form and the hypnotic rhythm of her dance. Seren's movements became more intense as she peered deep into their souls, summoning forth their most profound desires. For Monoco, she conjured the vision of Noko alive and well. Then, with a single sweep of her hand, Seren erased their visions, casting them back into reality. Now fully alert, the expeditioners steeled themselves for battle. The fight was grueling, Seren's attacks relentless, but at last they landed a devastating blow. In a final attempt to overwhelm them, Seren tried once more to invade their minds. Lune climbed on Seren's hand, drawing together a massive concentration of chroma before unleashing it, ending the Axon's reign. As Seren faded, she left behind a cut of cloth, the Axon's heart. Monoco and the others recovered, retrieved the cloth, and returned to the curator. That evening at camp, Mael handed the cloth to the curator, who took both Axon hearts and transformed them into a sword, the Barrier Breaker, before returning it to Mael. With their task complete, the expeditioners dispersed around the camp, each retreating to their own thoughts. Painted Verso sought out Esquie, who confessed he missed Sori. Painted Verso admitted he did as well, and Esquie asked if he knew Sori was his first rock. Esquie reminisced that Francois had been jealous, but eventually received his own rocks from Clair. Painted Verso was surprised, unaware Francois had his own stones, and wondered why Francois always took Esquie's. Esquie replied that it was simply because they were best friends, and Francois was fun. Painted Verso left him with that, and went to speak with Monoco again. Monoco asked if Painted Verso was finally ready to face the Paintress, to which he replied that he was. Monoco, restless, suggested they play a game of cards or dice. Painted Verso accused Monoco of always cheating, and Monoco retorted that only the unskilled called foul. Painted Verso noted that other Gestrals wouldn't play with Monoco either, asking if they were all weak too. Monoco declared them poor losers. He then proposed a duel, eager for the opportunity to test himself. Painted Verso agreed, and the two engaged in a friendly, spirited contest. This time, Painted Verso emerged victorious. Monoco insisted it was just luck, but Painted Verso reminded him of his own words about weak players making excuses. Monoco conceded, saying that since he was the one who said it, it had to be true. He praised Painted Verso's growing strength, and Painted Verso reciprocated the respect. Both agreed the duel had been fun, and decided to go share a drink together. Later that night, Monoco and Esquie sat around the campfire with the others, all of them in disbelief that the final confrontation with the Paintress was within reach. Ciel broke the moment by revealing that Painted Verso had been hiding a secret, and that Esquie had shared it with her. As she walked over, Esquie apologized to Painted Verso, only to be punched in the stomach by Ciel, causing wine to pour out into a cup. She handed the cup to Lune, while Esquie told Painted Verso she promised to trade him rocks for the knowledge of the wine. Painted Verso explained that he had stored his best vintages inside Esquie, and would share them for this special occasion. Esquie produced more wine, telling Painted Verso to stop drinking alone. The group laughed and raised a toast to Painted Verso's generosity, before he excused himself and retreated to be alone. Esquie watched as Mael and Ciel danced around the fire, while Lune and Monoco played an impromptu game of baseball with a rock and a stick. Laughter filled the night, the group finding rare joy in each other's company before settling in to rest, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. The following day, Esquie once again carried them, swimming the expeditioners to the barrier surrounding the monolith. Lune handed the barrier breaker sword to Mael, who stepped forward and tried to pierce the barrier. After several determined attempts, she summoned all her strength and finally shattered it. With the barrier broken, Esquie swam them to the shores of the monolith and dropped off Monoco and the others. As they looked out across the shattered world, the Paintress sat, crying at the base of the monolith. Monoco watched Painted Verso closely, noticing the turmoil in his face as he took in the enormity of what lay ahead. The women led the way down toward the Paintress, Monoco and Painted Verso following after, Painted Verso's face etched with indecision. When they arrived, the group stared in awe at the sheer, impossible size of the Paintress. They readied themselves for battle, but their attacks proved futile. As they caught their breath, Monoco watched the others searching for a solution, when suddenly the Paintress appeared before them. In a moment of horror, Mael's face burst into flames. Monoco, haunted by the memory of the fire that claimed the real Verso, could only turn away, unable to witness Ciel and Lune burning in agony as well. At last, the flames subsided. Monoco turned back to his companions just as the woman opened a portal. The group followed her through and entered the monolith itself, traversing distorted versions of their world and witnessing the memories of the Paintress. While the others speculated about the meaning of these visions, Monoco understood all too well who and what the Paintress was, but like Painted Verso, he said nothing. Eventually, they reached a place where a large image of Eileen and Renoir holding hands filled the space, only to be shattered as Painted Renoir stepped through. Painted Verso argued bitterly with his father, as Painted Renoir tried to prevent him from going through with his plan to defeat the Paintress. When Painted Renoir's patience was exhausted, Monoco and the others steeled themselves for one final battle. Together, they managed to defeat him, but Eileen's gift of immortality restored him almost immediately. In a last, desperate attempt, Painted Renoir attempted to subdue the expeditioners, pinning Monoco and the others to the ground and draining their chroma. At that moment, the curator arrived. Painted Renoir insisted that ending this would not bring his wife back and would only sever the last piece of his son he still possessed. The curator took Mael's hand and placed it on Painted Renoir's chest. As Renoir whispered that he loved them too, the Gommage claimed him, erasing him from the canvas. As the group caught their breath in the aftermath, Monoco turned away, struggling to remain loyal to both Painted Verso and the memory of the real Verso, and not reveal the cost that was yet to come. They made their way to the top of the monolith, where the Paintress awaited them. Painted Verso pleaded with her to leave, but convinced it was all a trick by her husband, she surrounded them with chroma and prepared for battle. The confrontation was fierce, and at one point, Eileen demanded to know how Monoco could betray Verso. But Monoco and the others fought on, eventually gaining the upper hand and knocking her down. As the ground began to tremble, Monoco looked around in alarm as the giant Paintress at the base of the monolith rose above them. Nearby, Esquie encircled, ready for anything. Painted Verso called Esquie's name, and Esquie responded with excitement, landing beside them. Painted Verso produced a rock and held it up. Esquie recognized it as Sori and absorbed its power, calling for everyone to climb aboard. They all mounted Esquie's back as he soared around the giant monstrosity, engaging Eileen in battle once more. Esquie's strength kept the expeditioners in the fight, and after a series of devastating blows, Monoco and the others managed to bring her down again. This time, Eileen finally relented. Painted Verso caught his mother as she collapsed, and Monoco, unable to watch, turned away until she faded completely from the canvas. With the Paintress gone, the number 33 faded from the monolith. Monoco turned to Painted Verso and told him he was finally free, then quickly corrected himself, telling the others that they all were. Monoco retreated, wanting solitude with his thoughts, while Mael, Ciel, and Lune made their way to the cliff's edge and planted the Expedition 33 flag. Monoco and Painted Verso looked out at the three women and beyond, toward the horizon, before deciding it was time to leave. Esquie swooped in, and the group climbed onto his back once more as he carried them home, the weight of their ordeal giving way to a fragile hope for the future. As they flew home atop Esquie's back, Monoco sat apart, lost in thought, burdened by the knowledge of what was yet to come. He heard Ciel's laughter and excitement behind him, and soon she approached, asking why he had been so quiet. Monoco, ever guarded with his secrets, feigned ignorance, pretending not to notice anything amiss. He was spared from further questioning as Mael's voice carried forward, asking what they were supposed to do now. Monoco turned his gaze back to the land below, bracing himself for the inevitable. Esquie then called out that Lumiere was below, and everyone readied themselves as he sped up, delivering them to the docks. The others were met with a hero's welcome, cheers and celebration echoing through the city, while Esquie and Monoco lingered at the edge of the group. Monoco wandered among the citizens, soon swarmed by children, some scared, some timid, all awestruck at seeing a real Gestral for the first time. They reached out to touch him, their wonder and excitement palpable, as Esquie joined the celebration, dancing and spinning with the children. Ciel moved through the crowd, calming the children as they basked in the joy of the moment. Monoco found himself reveling in the admiration and wonder of Lumiere's people, interacting gently with the children. But the joy was short-lived. Without warning, a massive wave of chroma swept over the city, confusion and fear spreading as the Gommage began anew. Monoco and Esquie could only watch helplessly as adults and children, heroes and bystanders alike, began to fade from existence, indiscriminate and unstoppable. They watched as Ciel accepted her fate with calm resignation. Lune struggled desperately to hold on, and Mael, overcome with confusion, dropped to her knees and vanished. In time, only Painted Verso remained, spared by Eileen's gift of immortality. Monoco and Esquie watched as he wandered the empty streets of Lumiere, alone and seeking to come to terms with his choices. They gave him space, taking flight together and soaring over the city, trying to adjust to the emptiness of their new world. Suddenly, an eruption of chroma tore through the city, and swaths of creatures appeared as Lumiere itself began to fade and erase. Monoco urged Esquie to hurry, and together they flew in, calling out for Painted Verso and Mael, now once again Alicia, who had returned. Monoco yelled for them to hop on, and Alicia, grabbing Painted Verso, paused only to reach for the lingering chroma of Ciel and Lune. They scrambled onto Esquie's back, who carried them away to safety, landing at the nearest shore to make camp for the night. There, Alicia struggled to harness her power, attempting to bring Ciel and Lune back. Monoco tried to comfort her, telling her not to worry, reminding her she had only just discovered these abilities and it had only been a day. Esquie added his own encouragement, telling Alicia that they believed in her. Painted Verso joined her, lending his support. At last, Alicia felt the presence of her friends, drew her sword like a paintbrush, and Monoco stood by as Ciel and Lune were restored. Disoriented, Ciel and Lune looked to Alicia, who assured them she would explain everything. Once the truth was revealed, Lune turned on Painted Verso, calling him a liar and a coward for keeping the truth from them. The group resolved to use the chroma trapped in the petrified expeditioners killed by the Nevrons, hoping to push Renoir out of the canvas once and for all. As they gathered in agreement, Monoco stepped forward with pride, declaring that it was time for the greatest expedition of all time. A little later, Painted Verso approached Esquie, who sat apart from the others. Esquie told Painted Verso that everyone was mad at him. Painted Verso asked if Esquie was angry as well. Esquie replied that he could be sad, or bad, or even rad, but never mad. Bad things happen when people get mad. Painted Verso acknowledged this, and Esquie reassured him again that he could never be angry with him. With that, Painted Verso moved on to speak with Monoco. Monoco, blunt as ever, told Painted Verso that though he didn't want to say it, he had warned him this would happen. Painted Verso thanked him sarcastically for the support. Monoco then asked if it had been worth it. Painted Verso remained silent, and Monoco pressed on, asking what he would do now. Painted Verso replied that he would work to earn back their trust, and Monoco warned him that that would not be easy. The next day, the group set out across the continent. Alicia moved from place to place, gathering the last remnants of chroma from the petrified expeditioners slain by Nevrons. Their journey eventually brought them to the dark shores, where Monoco and the others looked out over the sea toward Lumiere, an army of summoned expeditioners standing ready at their backs. After the long trek, they made camp once more. That evening, Painted Verso spoke with Esquie. Esquie confided that Renoir was frightening when angry, and Painted Verso admitted that in some ways, he wasn't so different from his own father. Esquie, always seeing the connections, called them cousins. Painted Verso then asked about Maman's the word, wondering why Esquie had shared the secret about the wine. Esquie explained that Ciel told him sharing was caring, and Painted Verso couldn't believe that was all it took. Esquie said that Ciel smiled at him, and it made him feel warm and fuzzy. Painted Verso teased him for cracking so easily. Esquie replied that he thought he was just a wine keeper, not a secret keeper, and Painted Verso reminded him there was barely any wine left. Esquie called him out for lying, saying he could tell Painted Verso felt warm and fuzzy when Ciel smiled at him too. Painted Verso denied it, but Esquie pointed out his face looked red, then remembered Ciel had shown him a cool rock. Painted Verso hoped it was a special one and asked its name. Esquie said it hadn't introduced itself yet, nor did he know what it did, but that Lune was helping study it. She knew a lot about rocks after all. Painted Verso agreed, saying of course she did. Esquie talked about how much fun it was talking to Lune, recalling that she asked a lot of questions when they first met, even about Esquie and the real Verso. Painted Verso asked if Esquie had talked to Lune about him too. Esquie confirmed he had, noting that Painted Verso often spoke with her as well. Esquie observed that Painted Verso seemed to like when Lune was excited. Painted Verso, flustered, tried to change the subject, but Esquie said he looked flustered and offered a hug. Painted Verso replied that no one would turn down an Esquie hug. Suddenly, Esquie's demeanor changed. Painted Verso asked what was wrong, and Esquie asked why he had hidden Sori from him for so long. Painted Verso admitted that he was afraid that if Esquie had the stone, he would fly the group back to Lumiere. Esquie called that mean, though he added that being mean isn't always truly mean. Painted Verso reluctantly agreed. Esquie then compared him to Francois, Painted Verso saying Francois would hate that. Esquie excitedly added that Francois was like Painted Verso. They both hid things, but weren't truly mean. Esquie then exclaimed that he remembered where he lost Uri. Painted Verso asked which stone that was, and Esquie explained it allowed him to swim deep underwater, and that he'd left it in Francois' cave. Painted Verso noted that Francois wouldn't give Uri up without a fight. Esquie said he didn't want to fight, recalling that Francois was mad last time, and suggested Painted Verso serenade Francois, since Francois and Clair used to sing together and it made Francois happy. Painted Verso doubted that would work, but Esquie suggested a dance instead, since Francois had loved dancing with Clair. Painted Verso was confused by the idea and suggested they trade him something for it. Esquie eventually suggested they could trade Francois for another rock. Esquie proposed they could make a new rock look like Francois with a little clay on top and paint it. Esquie said the worst that could happen was that Painted Verso would have to fight Francois for it. Esquie pointed to a rock nearby, and Painted Verso offered to see what he could do. Esquie began breaking and carving the rock until he fashioned a small statue of Francois and Clair, exclaiming that it felt like Francois was actually there. Esquie said he was ready to go, and Painted Verso asked if he wanted to leave immediately. Esquie insisted, saying he could fly them and it wouldn't take long. Painted Verso agreed, and they set out for Francois's cave. Upon arrival, Francois greeted them with a childish disdain, and Esquie called him Fran. Francois scolded him for the nickname, and Esquie asked why he hadn't said he had Uri. Francois demanded proof, so Painted Verso offered the Francois statue in exchange for Uri. Francois grew furious at the likeness, but Esquie insisted it had captured him perfectly. Francois shouted that there was no deal and dared them to come and get it. Painted Verso fought Francois and managed to win the one-on-one battle. Francois, defeated, relented and handed over Uri, telling them to just take it and go. Esquie expressed his happiness at being reunited with Uri and thanked Francois. Francois demanded they leave the little miniature behind, and Esquie felt a pang of sadness for him. As they left, they could hear Francois begin to cry, and Painted Verso remarked that Francois truly did miss Clair. Back at camp, Esquie announced that he could now swim the group underwater if needed, and told Painted Verso he was the best. Painted Verso told him to keep the compliments coming, and Esquie obliged, declaring him the smartest, fastest, funniest, bestest, strongest, and fluffiest. Painted Verso asked about fluffiest, and Esquie explained that his soul was the fluffiest. Painted Verso then mused that Francois really did miss Clair, and Esquie agreed, saying that Francois waited for her to return daily, and had stopped singing since she left. Esquie expressed hope that Clair would return, and that Francois would be happy again. Painted Verso asked if Esquie really believed that, and Esquie said Clair and Francois were best friends, just as he and Painted Verso were, and that neither would ever truly leave the other. Painted Verso asked if Esquie missed the real Verso, and Esquie fell silent. Painted Verso apologized for asking, admitting it was a stupid question, but explained that Esquie never mentioned the real Verso when he was around. Esquie replied that it made Painted Verso sad, and Painted Verso asked if it made Esquie sad because he wasn't the real Verso. Esquie explained that both were his friends, cousins, same, but different, and that it didn't bother him. Painted Verso, grateful, smiled and thanked him. Esquie replied that they should keep having adventures forever. Painted Verso smiled and bid him goodnight before heading over to Monoco. A few moments later, Ciel approached Esquie and asked if they could talk. Esquie wondered if she was troubled, and Ciel asked about the first time they met and his comment about her being a terrible swimmer. Esquie replied that he had never said that, though Ciel insisted he had. Esquie then realized she was asking about their second meeting in the caves. Ciel admitted she was lost, and Esquie said being confused was fun for him too. She asked him to clarify what he meant by second time, and he explained. First means one, second means two. Ciel asked if she was swimming the first time they met, and Esquie said yes, she was, but she stopped, and that was dangerous. Ciel realized that it was Esquie who had rescued her, and she asked how he knew. He explained that he heard her tears and came to help. Struggling for words, Ciel simply thanked him, tears in her eyes. Esquie observed that she liked to cry, just like Painted Verso, and Ciel replied that she knew. Esquie laughed, then asked if she had found what she was searching for in the sea. Ciel said she hadn't, but hoped she would soon. Esquie told her he always felt sad when he lost his rocks, but he always found them again, and assured her that she too would find what she was looking for. Ciel smiled, thanking him and telling him he was the best. Elsewhere, Painted Verso and Monoco sat by the fire, the flames flickering between them. Monoco asked how Painted Verso intended to regain everyone's trust. Painted Verso wondered aloud if Monoco was enjoying his predicament. Monoco, blunt as ever, told him he couldn't rely on charm anymore and pressed him for his new plan. Painted Verso sighed, and Monoco pointed out the fact that they were even talking to him was a start. Painted Verso changed the subject, asking if Monoco was alright. Monoco, in turn, asked how it felt to finally achieve his goal. Painted Verso fell silent, and Monoco said he was just a Gestral, but he would support him nonetheless. Painted Verso apologized. Monoco told him not to. He shouldn't grow attached to humans, since their lives were so short and they never come back, but he still shared in their sadness and their joy. Painted Verso told Monoco that the real Verso had known what Monoco was like as a dog in the real world, and that he, as Painted Verso, knew what Monoco was like inside the canvas. He assured Monoco he was not just a Gestral, but a loyal friend. Monoco admitted he had left Painted Verso a decade ago, supposedly to protect the Grandis, but in truth, he had simply grown tired of watching every expedition end in death. Painted Verso said he had known this. Monoco, now back at his side, wondered if his loyalty was because of who he was, or because the real Verso made him that way. Painted Verso jested that Monoco had beaten him up enough to know otherwise, and Monoco agreed. Monoco reminisced about the days when the whole Desandra family could play together, when it felt like nothing bad could ever happen. Painted Verso said nothing good ever lasts, and Monoco lamented that lately, the bad had become far too familiar. Painted Verso suggested they could change that, asking if Monoco wanted to hunt some Nevrons. Monoco agreed, saying it would make him feel better, and Painted Verso proposed they go get cut in half. The two hunted down Nevrons together, and satisfied, returned to camp. With his mood lifted, Monoco remarked on how good the night was, and how the sky above was full of promise. Painted Verso, skeptical, asked if he really believed that. Monoco replied they would bring Noco back tonight. Painted Verso reminded him he wanted to wait, but Monoco insisted that with the future uncertain, they should give Noco the gift of life now. The journey would be short, he said. They just needed to go to the sacred river. Painted Verso warned that Golgor would be angry if Monoco skipped the line again, but Monoco said he would worry about it later. Monoco reminded Painted Verso that he had helped him bring Noco back before and asked for his help again. Painted Verso replied, "Always." At the water's edge, Painted Verso remarked it had been a while. Monoco urged him to hurry before Golgor found out. As if on cue, Golgor appeared, ferocious, accusing Monoco of trying to skip the queue again. Monoco asked how she knew, and Golgor explained she could smell the dozen of Nevron's feet he was always carrying. Monoco conceded that was fair. Golgor reminded him that all the Gestrals present and in the sacred forest were waiting to be reborn, and Monoco protested that the rule was foolish and all should be revived. Golgor countered that such chaos would overwhelm the adults and that she would hate the noise. Imagine forests filled with unruly newborn Gestrals. Monoco, arms crossed, declared he had no choice. Painted Verso warned him again about his provocations, but Monoco insisted he had thought it through. He demanded a trial by combat, to which Golgor, expecting it, agreed. Painted Verso asked if he was required to fight as well, and Monoco pleaded for his help. Painted Verso, resigned, agreed for Noco's sake, and Golgor expressed hope they would survive. The battle was fierce. Golgor's skill was formidable, but the two pressed her hard, forcing her to go full brush mode. Transformed, she continued her relentless assault, but eventually, Painted Verso and Monoco prevailed. Golgor reverted, joking about her squat workout, and said she couldn't finish the fight right now. Monoco teased her about being afraid to lose, while Painted Verso urged him to stop. Golgor admitted they had entertained her, and allowed Monoco to bring Noco back this time. Monoco, stubborn, said he wouldn't thank her, and then immediately, he did. He placed Noco's container in the hands of the river spirit and set it in the water. Moments later, Noco stood before them dazed, struggling to remember Monoco. Monoco greeted him warmly, and Painted Verso asked after his favorite salesman. Noco, still confused, looked to Golgor for guidance. Monoco asked if Golgor was crying. She denied it. Noco asked if they could go home, but Monoco said not yet. They had a mission. Noco could not remember the others, and Monoco assured him they would want to see him, that they had found treasures for him to trade. Still confused, Noco was gently led away by Golgor, who suggested he return to the village until he could adjust. She asked if he wanted to come, and Noco nodded. Monoco declared himself Noco's guardian, but Painted Verso reassured him that it was safer for now, and they could visit soon. Monoco and Noco shared a long look before Golgor leapt away with the newborn Gestral. Painted Verso teased that Noco would be fine, especially without Monoco's influence. Monoco, only half joking, agreed. He thanked Painted Verso for his help and wondered aloud how Golgor was so strong. Painted Verso boasted he could beat her alone, and Monoco vowed to never show weakness again. Together, they made their way back to camp. Painted Verso asked if Monoco was alright. Monoco didn't answer immediately, then admitted that Noco was safe and could adjust, but each time Noco returned, he lost more of his memory. Monoco mourned the part of Noco that was now lost, but knew his old friend was still there. He thanked Painted Verso for his help, and the two stood in thoughtful silence. Painted Verso asked why Monoco always skipped the queue for Noco. Monoco explained there never should have been a queue. The real Verso wanted them to be excited for new beginnings, and had created the sacred river for that reason. Monoco remembered the day Noco found him after the fracture and protected him, and that now he was meant to protect Noco. Noco had cared for him, and now Monoco felt helpless. Painted Verso asked if it was his fault. Monoco said he understood why Painted Verso wanted to end the canvas and avoid the unknown, but he himself wasn't ready to gamble on tomorrow. Painted Verso asked why Monoco was helping him, and Monoco replied it was not just for him, but for the real Verso too. He said the real Verso had given them many new beginnings, and he was sure he would want the same for Painted Verso and everyone else. Painted Verso was at a loss for words, and Monoco invited him over for a snuggle, Painted Verso declaring himself the little spoon. Monoco laughed and agreed. They spent a few more moments together, sentimental and a little weird, before settling in for the night. The next day, the group began their journey to Lumiere to face Renoir. Along the way, Monoco and Esquie watched as Painted Verso, once their unshakable friend, struggle beneath the morning weight of his losses. Painted Alicia and Painted Clair, the last two members of his family, were now gone. The pain deepened as Monoco assisted in freeing an old friend, Simon, from his torment, forcing Painted Verso to say goodbye to yet another remnant of his past. With Simon's release, the last threads connecting him to everything he once knew were severed. Monoco and Esquie could sense the heaviness settling over him, a grief too vast for words. As they pressed on, the oldest layer of the canvas, Verso's drafts, burst into view. They entered the old layer, and for Esquie, excitement returned. He hadn't visited this whimsical world since he was small. Eager, he flew ahead, delighted in the familiar landscapes where he and the real Verso had shared countless adventures. Journeying through this playful, surreal world, the expeditioners were startled by a booming voice that shook the very land. Alicia, alarmed, asked what it was. Esquie, with a mischievous glint, mused that it was the most archest of nemesises, and soared ahead. As they neared the mountain's summit, Esquie hovered above, promising they would soon meet his oldest enemy. Monoco, always hungry for a challenge, grew even more excited at the prospect of battle. Alicia asked if he meant who she thought, but Esquie only shouted with glee, "Whee!" They entered the mountain's heart, known as the root of all evil, where a flamboyant hot spring, reminiscent of Esquie's own, awaited them. At the top of the stairs, Painted Verso instructed Alicia to summon their adversary. With resolve, she called out for Oschio, demanding he show himself and fight. Oschio emerged with a deafening roar, his entrance as theatrical as any villainous wrestler from the Fête Foraine, the carnival that had once captivated the real Verso. Esquie greeted his cousin warmly, telling him he missed him. Oschio, in grand fashion, announced himself, explaining that he had been holding his breath for 5,000 years until they arrived. Esquie praised the feat, but boasted he himself had managed 6,000 years. Oschio, indignant, accused Esquie of ruining his moment. After Oschio finished his elaborate introduction, Monoco and the others readied themselves for the coming battle. The fight was fierce, with Oschio unleashing his ultimate attack, but the expeditioners managed to stop him and secure victory. Oschio, refusing to concede, proclaimed himself the most powerful being, vowing never to be defeated. Painted Verso looked to Esquie, asking if he was ready. At last, Esquie's excitement burst forth. Together, Painted Verso and Esquie charged in, attacking Oschio as if they had been transported back in time to the days when Esquie, alongside the real Verso, had fought him in the canvas. Blows were exchanged until at last, they gained the upper hand. Oschio taunted Painted Verso, telling him he would never be a good musician and had no choice but to paint, echoing the very doubts and darkness Verso's parents had sown in his soul. But with one final, decisive blow, Painted Verso and Esquie defeated Oschio, who shouted in frustration and slowly sank into the water. As the defeated Oschio vanished, Monoco rushed over, hoping to claim Oschio's foot as a trophy, but Lune held him back. Esquie bid his cousin farewell and thanked him for the fight, only for Oschio to flip him off in parting, leaving Esquie momentarily stunned. Esquie placed his hand on Painted Verso's head, a gesture of comfort and understanding, recognizing at last what Oschio had represented for the real Verso. With the battle behind them, the group left the drafts, mounting Esquie once more as he carried them onward to Lumiere in the final confrontation. Esquie carried the group into the city, flying low over the docks, while Renoir's creation still patrolled the ruined streets. He landed smoothly, allowing Monoco and the others to dismount and prepare themselves for what was to come. Alicia instructed Esquie to wait by the docks, keeping him out of harm's way in case Renoir tried to strike at him. Esquie agreed and took to the skies once more, circling high above the city. With resolve, Alicia raised her sword, summoning hundreds of fallen expeditioners. She pointed the blade forward, commanding the army of the fallen to charge. The spectral ranks raced through the city, clashing with Renoir's creations, as Monoco called out, expressing his admiration for their indomitable fighting spirit. The group pressed through the decaying city, pushing ever closer until they finally confronted Renoir just outside the gardens. Alicia pleaded with her father to stop his attempts to erase the canvas, but Renoir met every plea with cold logic and counter-argument. Monoco watched as Ciel and Lune joined in, trying to reach him, but their efforts only deepened Renoir's frustration. At last, in a surge of anger, he lashed out at Alicia before regaining his composure. Sensing the imminent battle, Monoco and the others readied themselves to stand with Alicia against her father. Renoir struck his cane to the ground, transforming the world around them. Chroma surged as he assumed his curator form, and the expeditioners engaged him in combat. The battle was fierce and exhausting, but at last, they landed a powerful blow, nearly defeating him. Yet, to their dismay, the Axons that were summoned behind him stirred, and Seren came to his aid, healing him completely. The expeditioners struggled to recover. Monoco, despite his love for a challenge, admitted that things were getting out of hand. As the group considered their next move, a massive portal opened above, and a woman crashed down into a field of red petals. Eileen emerged, her presence dominating the battlefield. Renoir pleaded with her to leave, but Eileen vanished, only to reappear moments later as the giant Paintress at the base of the monolith. She gathered Chroma in her hands and unleashed it upon Seren, while the others braced for the second wave of the fight. Monoco and his companions fought with everything they had. As Renoir prepared to deal a final blow, Alicia leapt high into the air and brought him down. Renoir, weakened but still alive, tried again to justify himself, speaking now to Eileen, who towered over him, reaching for him. In that moment, the two reconnected. Eileen relented and faded back into the real world. Once again, Alicia pleaded with her father to let go, but Renoir opened a portal, revealing Eileen's suffering in reality. Painted Verso stepped forward, his concern for his mother plain. Renoir and Alicia exchanged final, heartfelt pleas. At last, Renoir relented. He embraced Alicia, promising to leave the light on for her, and then faded away, returning to the real world. Painted Verso lingered, watching his mother's torment until he could bear it no longer. He apologized to his companions, then leapt into the portal. At this point in the journey, the canonical ending for Monoco and Esquie concludes, and the rest of their fate, like so much else in the canvas, remains in the hands of the player. The first ending to consider is, for Esquie and Monoco, the least rewarding in terms of emotional resonance or narrative closure. If the player chooses to fight as Alicia in the heart of the canvas, it is Painted Verso who is defeated. With his fall, Alicia gains control over all the chroma in the canvas. She chooses to repaint the world, restoring it to the state it held after the fracture, but before Renoir's attack. In the aftermath, Esquie and Monoco are seen outside in the concert hall, serving as ushers for the now mortal Painted Verso's performance. And that is all. These two, who had stood beside the real Verso since the beginning, who had endured thousands of years, and who had been Painted Verso's closest friends and companions for 67 years, are reduced to standing guard outside, not guests of honor, but mere bystanders to the closing of the story. Alicia's ending has its merits in its own rights, as I've discussed in the Part 2 timeline video, but for Esquie and Monoco, it is a disappointing and hollow resolution, one that gives their journey no real weight or significance. I hate to say it, but for those two characters, it's a rather empty conclusion, but I digress. If the player instead chooses to fight as Painted Verso, the outcome is very different. Painted Verso defeats Alicia, causing her to fade from the canvas and return to the real world. In the quiet aftermath, Painted Verso turns and sees Monoco and Esquie standing together inside the portal at the heart of the canvas, a place where painted beings cannot survive. Resigned to their fate, Monoco and Esquie move to meet him. The three of them share a final, bittersweet embrace, loving, warm, and heartbreaking. Painted Verso begins to cry, telling them how much he will miss them. They continue to hold each other, as one by one, they begin to fade, erasing from existence. Painted Verso weeps as the red petals, fragments of their essence, drift away, marking the true end of their stories. Esquie and Monoco are the quiet foundation of the canvas, two beings who have witnessed the rise and fall of the world, carrying the memory of everything that was lost and the hope for what might be found again. From the very beginning, both existed on the margins of greatness, never the architects of fate, but always the glue that held the story together. Esquie began as a plush toy, a silent companion and anchor for the real Verso during the lonely, pressurized years of his childhood. When Verso painted his own world, he brought Esquie to life, not as a pet, but as a protector, a confidant, and the gentle heart of the canvas. Esquie became the one who listened, who comforted those in the darkest moments, who absorbed pain so that others could endure. His wisdom is simple and sometimes confounding, but always rooted in kindness and loyalty. He is the first to offer a laugh, the first to dance, and the last to let go, no matter how much the world changes around him. Monoco, by contrast, is the survivor, the seeker, the merchant, the guardian, and the relentless pragmatist. Born from the loyalty and spirit of a family dog, Monoco's life is one of endless cycles. Reincarnation, responsibility, and the burden of watching friends and family fade while he remains. He is blunt and stubborn, a fighter with a deep sense of duty, but beneath his bravado lies a wellspring of care. Monoco never allows himself or others to be left behind. He is the one who remembers every loss, who demands second chances, who pushes for new beginnings even when the world resists. With each return, he mourns what is lost and cherishes what remains, embodying the courage to form new bonds despite the inevitability of grief. Together, Esquie and Monoco are the soul of the canvas. While others fight for power, or change, or for redemption, these two carry the quiet, everyday heroism of endurance and companionship. Their stories are the steady heartbeat beneath every expedition, every battle, and every rebirth. Whether soothing a grieving friend, offering a joke to lighten a heavy night, or standing outside a concert hall after thousands of years of loyalty, they are the ones who make survival meaningful, who prove that love and memory can outlast even the collapse of worlds. In the end, the canvas offers them no grand resolution. Sometimes they are left as bystanders, their immense histories relegated to the background. Sometimes they embrace each other in the face of oblivion, fading away not as legends, but as friends. It is in these moments, small, human, and true, that their significance is clearest. Esquie and Monoco are not just survivors, they are the keepers of hope, delivering memory of what was and what could be. They endure, and in that endurance, they remind us all what matters most, not the triumphs of heroes or the machinations of gods, but the bonds that hold us together, the laughter that chases away the darkness, and the promise that even when all else fades, no one is truly alone. And that is the story of Esquie and Monoco, two companions who stood at the edge of every world, who carried loyalty through centuries of change, and who reminded us that endurance and kindness are sometimes the greatest forms of courage. Their names may not be etched in monuments or written in the legends of Lumiere, but the canvas would not have survived this long without them. Its heart would have not kept beating. Their story is a reminder that the ones who wait, who listen, who find a way to bring laughter and hope, even when everything else is lost, are often the ones who make every quest possible. They are the reason memory endures, and why the world remembers not just the victors, but the friends who made survival bearable. But their journey is not the only one that deserves to be told in full. Next time, on Video Game Lore, we'll turn our attention to the Gestrals and the Grandis themselves, their origins, mysteries, and their secret history. We'll follow their threads through every layer of the canvas and uncover what makes these creatures so essential to the world Verso built. If this story resonated with you, or if you have your own theories about Esquie, Monoco, or the hidden lore of the canvas, join in the discussion in the comments below. This community's insight is what makes these journeys worth sharing. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and have that notification bell turned on so you'll know when the next video drops. My name is Vigil, and this has been Video Game Lore, and I will see you in the next one.